A motorcycle slammed sideways into a guardrail and crumpled. The rider went over the handlebars and hit the asphalt hard. Rain came down in sheets. A woman screamed once, then went silent. Her leg was twisted the wrong way under the wreck. Headlights swept across her through the storm. A truck skidded to a stop on the shoulder. A door flew open. Boots hit the ground running. Big hands pressed down on the wound and would not let go. He didn't know her name. He didn't ask. He just kept her breathing, one breath at a time, while the desert tried to take her. That man was Elias Ward, a retired Navy SEAL who thought his war was behind him. He had no idea the woman under his hands was married to the Hells Angels. What rolled up his road the next morning, nobody could have guessed. Stay with me. Now here's the thing about Elias Ward. He was not a man who went looking for trouble. 58 years old. 22 of those years in the Navy, most of it in places he would never talk about, doing work he would never describe. When he came home to Kingman, Arizona, he came home to be left alone. That was the whole plan, be left alone. He had a small house at the end of a gravel road, 3 miles off Route 66, with a fence he built himself and a porch he sat on most evenings. He had a truck older than some of the men he used to serve with. And he had Bishop. Bishop was a German shepherd, gray in the muzzle now, slow to get up in the mornings, 12 years old and every one of them showing. That dog had been with Elias since the day he retired. They understood each other. Neither one asked for much. Elias kept to himself in town. He nodded at people. He paid cash. He fixed his own engine and mended his own fence, and he did not, under any circumstances, tell strangers what he used to do for a living. When people asked, he said he was a mechanic. That was easier, because the truth is, when you tell people you were a SEAL, they get a look in their eye. They want a story. And Elias didn't have stories he wanted to give away, but some things you never lose. You can retire the man, but you can't retire the training. 15 years out of the service, and Elias still slept light, still sat with his back to the wall, still checked the exits of every room he walked into without even thinking about it. And his hands still remembered how to save a life. That part never left him, not for one single day. So on that particular night, when the storm rolled down out of the high desert and turned Route 66 into a black river, Elias was doing something ordinary. He was driving home from the feed store with a sack of dog food in the bed of his truck and Bishop asleep on the passenger seat. Rain so hard the wipers couldn't keep up, lightning cracking out past the mesa. Most folks had the sense to stay off the road on a night like that. He almost didn't see the wreck. That's the truth. If the lightning hadn't flashed at the exact second it did, he'd have driven right past. But it flashed, and in that half-second of white light he saw it. A motorcycle on its side against the guardrail, a dark shape on the road, something that shouldn't be there. Elias hit the brakes. The truck slid on the wet asphalt and stopped 20 feet past. He was out the door before he'd even thought about it, boots in the water, rain down his collar, Bishop up now barking behind the glass. And there she was, a woman maybe 40, sprawled half under the bike, leather jacket torn open. Blood on the pavement, thinned pink by the rain. Her right leg bent the wrong way at the shin, and Elias knew that break the second he saw it. Open fracture. Bad one. Her face was gray. Her lips were going blue. She was breathing in fast little sips like she couldn't get enough air. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered. She tried to speak and couldn't. Now, most people see something like that and they freeze. Their brain locks up. They don't know where to put their hands. Elias was not most people. Something in him clicked over cold and clear into a place he hadn't visited in years but knew as well as his own name. Assess. Airway, breathing, circulation, stop the bleed, keep them warm, keep them talking. He ran his hands over her, fast and sure. The leg was the loudest wound but not the most dangerous. She was cold, too cold. She was going into shock, and shock out here, in a storm, miles from a hospital, kills more people than the crash itself. He'd seen it happen to men twice as strong as this woman. He pulled off his own jacket and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding on her thigh, leaning his weight into it. She groaned. Good. A groan meant she was still in there. "Stay with me," he told her. "You hear me? Keep your eyes on me. Don't you go anywhere." And that was the moment an ordinary bad night turned into something else. Because Elias Ward made a decision, kneeling in that rain. He decided this woman was not going to die on his stretch of highway. Not tonight. Not while his hands still worked. He didn't know it yet, but that decision was about to change his whole life. The first thing he did was call it in. One hand pressing the wound, the other digging his phone out of his soaked pocket. He got a dispatcher, gave the mile marker, gave the situation in that flat-clipped way he used to give reports. Female, 40s, motorcycle versus guardrail, open tib-fib fracture, hemorrhaging, shock setting in. The dispatcher told him what he already feared. The storm had washed out a low crossing between here and town. Ambulance was coming, but it had to go the long way. 25 minutes, maybe 30. 30 minutes. Elias looked down at the woman's gray face and did the math he'd done 100 times in his old life. 30 minutes was a long time to keep somebody alive with your bare hands on the side of a road. "All right," he said, mostly to himself. "We can do 30. He went to work. He whistled once, sharp, and Bishop came out of the truck through the open door, down into the rain, ears back. Not liking the storm one bit, but coming anyway because Elias called. Elias didn't have a blanket, but he had a dog. A warm, living, 100-pound dog. He guided Bishop down against the woman's other side, pressed him in close along her ribs. "Stay," he said. "Warm her up, stay." And Bishop stayed. That old shepherd lay down in the cold water the length of a stranger's body, and he did not move. The leg was next. Elias needed to splint it before he moved her, and he needed to move her because she was lying in a running gutter of ice water. He found what he needed in the flashes of lightning. A length of trim off the wrecked bike. His own belt. The strap off her saddlebag. He worked fast, talking the whole time, low and steady, the way you talk to keep someone tied to the world. "What's your name?" he asked her. Not because he needed it, because he needed her talking. "Dana," she whispered, first clear word out of her. "Dana, good, I'm Elias. You're gonna be okay, Dana, I've got you." "My husband." Her hand found his wrist and gripped it with a strength that surprised him. "You gotta heal." And then she was gone again, out cold, her hand going slack. Elias splinted the leg. He immobilized it above and below the break, cinched the straps firm, kept the pressure on the bleeding. When he was sure the splint would hold, he got his arms under her, careful, spine straight, and lifted her out of the water up onto the dry floor of his truck cab, laid across the bench seat. He climbed in beside her. Bishop jumped up and pressed in again on her far side. And there in the cab, out of the rain at last, Elias kept her going. Her breathing kept trying to quit on him. It would go shallow, then stop, and each time Elias said her name loud and rubbed his knuckles hard against her breastbone until she gasped and came back. Her pulse was thready and too fast. Her skin was clammy. He raised her good leg to send blood back to her core. He kept his jacket on the wound. He talked and talked about the desert, about his dog, about nothing at all, anything to keep a thread running between them. "You've got people, Dana," he said. "I heard you. Your husband, he's waiting on you. You don't get to quit on him tonight." "Not on my watch." Twice more she stopped breathing. Twice more he brought her back. He'd remember later that he never once thought about who she was or what the patches on her jacket meant or whether there'd be any reward at the end of it. That's not how his mind worked. There was a life in front of him. That was the whole world. 29 minutes after his call, red and white lights came cutting through the rain. The ambulance and a fire truck right behind it. Medics came running with a gurney and a bag, and Elias, still holding pressure with one hand, gave them the fastest, cleanest report they'd heard all year. Vitals, timeline, interventions, everything. One of the medics, a young guy, looked at him. "You a doctor?" "No," Elias said, "just used to do this." They loaded Dana. They worked on her right there on the shoulder, got a line in, got her stable enough to move. As they lifted the gurney, one of the medics turned to Elias, rain streaming off his helmet. "Honest to God, sir, 5 more minutes she doesn't make it. You held her together. You know that." Elias just nodded. He called Bishop to his side. He watched the doors close. He watched the lights pull away down 66 into the dark, and then it was quiet. Just Elias and his dog, soaked to the bone, standing next to a wrecked motorcycle in the settling rain. He didn't ask where they were taking her. He didn't leave his name and number. He put his old dog back in the truck, climbed in, and drove home. Here's the part that matters. He thought it was over. He got home a little after 1 in the morning. The storm had blown itself out. He toweled Bishop dry and gave him an extra scoop of food for being so brave. He stood under a hot shower until the shivering stopped. He hung his ruined jacket over a chair, and then he lay down in his own bed in his own quiet house, and he thought, well, that was a strange one. Hope she pulls through. He figured he'd never know how it turned out. That was fine. That was how these things went. You do what you can, and then the world takes them away in an ambulance, and you go back to your small, quiet life. He'd probably never even learn her last name. He fell asleep to the sound of nothing at all. No wind, no rain. Just the deep silence of the high desert at night. The most peaceful he'd felt in a long while. He had no idea what was already rolling toward him in the dark. It started as a sound. Elias came up out of sleep the way he always did, all at once, no fog, eyes open and body still. Gray light in the window, early. And underneath the silence he'd fallen asleep to, there was something now. A low sound, far off but growing. A rumble in the earth more than in the air. It came up through the floorboards and into the frame of the bed. Bishop was already at the window, hackles up, a growl deep in his chest. Elias knew engines. He'd heard every kind of engine man ever built. And this was engines. A lot of them, more than he could count. Coming up the only road that led to his house, the dead-end gravel road that went nowhere but here. He was up and dressed in under a minute. Boots. Old habit made him check the pistol in the drawer, and old wisdom made him leave it there. He walked out onto his porch into the cool morning, and he stopped. The road was full. Motorcycles, bumper to bumper, wheel to wheel, filling his narrow gravel road as far back as the bend and beyond it, out onto the frontage road, and beyond that too. Hundreds of them. He'd learn later the number was near 800. 800 motorcycles, engines idling in a low, steady thunder that rolled across his little patch of desert like weather. And on every jacket, front and back, the same patch, the death's head. The wings, the 2 words he knew even from a distance. Hell's Angels. Now, Elias Ward had faced a lot of things in his life without his heart rate moving much. But he stood on his porch and looked at 800 of the most feared men in America lined up outside his fence, and even he felt something cold go down his spine, because he did not yet understand why they were there. And when 800 armed men show up at your house at dawn, the reasons that come to mind first are not good ones. Bishop stood beside him, stiff and low, that growl still rolling. The engines cut, not all at once, in a wave front to back until the thunder died down into a ticking, breathing quiet. And out of the front rank, a man swung off his bike and started walking up the gravel toward the porch. Older, broad. Gray beard, hard face. A president's patch on his chest and eyes that had seen everything. 2 men flanked him a step behind. That's when a 4th vehicle came around the bend. Not a motorcycle, a county sheriff's SUV, lights on but silent, nosing up along the shoulder past the bikes. It stopped hard on the gravel, and a deputy climbed out with his hand already resting on his belt, young and wide-eyed, and scared out of his mind at the sight of what was parked on this road. And the deputy did the thing that changed everything. He looked past the bikers, straight at Elias on the porch, and he called out in a shaking voice, "Sir, are you Elias Ward? We got a report. A report you assaulted a woman on Route 66 last night. These men here," his voice cracked, "these men say you're the one who put Dana Coyle in the hospital." The whole world tilted. Elias stood very still, assaulted her, put her in the hospital. In one sentence, the night flipped inside out. He had knelt in a storm and bled and frozen to keep a stranger alive, and now the law was standing on his road telling him he was the one who'd hurt her. And 800 men who loved her had come to collect the debt. The president stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at Elias. His face gave away nothing. "You Ward." "I am," Elias said. His voice came out level, it always did. "Dana Coyle, you know that name." "I know her first name. She told it to me last night." On the highway. Behind the president, a ripple went through the front ranks. Men shifting, someone spat. And Elias understood in that clear, cold way of his exactly how thin the ground was under his feet. One deputy with a shaking hand and a radio, 800 men. If this went the wrong way, that deputy could not save him and no one else was coming. This was no longer about a good deed on a dark road. This was survival now, his survival and Bishop's. And it was going to be decided in the next 60 seconds on his own front porch in the gray light of morning. Now, I want you to sit with how bad this looked. A lesser man would have panicked, would have shouted, would have run, would have grabbed for that pistol and turned a misunderstanding into a bloodbath. Elias did none of those things. He'd been in worse rooms than this with longer odds, and he'd learned the one thing that keeps you alive when you're outnumbered 800 to 1. You stay calm, you tell the truth, and you let it land. "I'm going to tell you exactly what happened," Elias said, slow, clear, to the president and past him, loud enough to carry down the ranks. "I was driving home in the storm. I found her thrown from her bike against the guardrail at mile marker 51. Compound fracture, right leg. She was bleeding out and going into shock. I called 911 and they told me the ambulance was 30 minutes out because the crossing washed. So I splinted the leg, I stopped the bleed, and I kept her breathing for 30 minutes until the paramedics got there. My dog laid down in the water and kept her warm. Then they took her and I went home. I never touched that woman except to save her life, and I never asked for a single thing in return." Silent, just the tick of cooling engines. "That's a story," said a younger biker near the front, stepping up, fists tight. "That's a real good story, old man. Nobody saw you. All we know is our sister went out on a run and came back broken, and there was some big military-looking guy's hands all over her. You expect us to just—" "Ricky," the president said one word and the young man shut his mouth. And that's when a phone came out. The president pulled it from his cut, thumbed it, held it to his ear, his eyes never leaving Elias the whole time. He said, "Say it again, Dana." "Say it slow so I hear you." He listened. The whole road listened, though they couldn't hear a word of it. 800 men watched their president's face, and his face changed. He lowered the phone. He turned around, slow, and faced the ranks of his own men. When he spoke, his voice carried all the way back to the bend. "She's awake, she's talking, and she says the man who hurt her is the drunk in the pickup who ran her off the road and kept driving. This man," he pointed up at the porch without looking, "this is the man who pulled her out. This is the man who kept her alive till the ambulance came. She's been begging us since she woke up. Find the man with the dog. Find the man with the dog and thank him." Nobody moved. 800 faces turned up toward the porch where an old man stood with his old dog. And Elias, who had spent his whole life not needing anybody's thanks, felt his throat go tight. The president turned back around. He took off his sunglasses. And this hard old man, this feared and famous man, climbed the porch steps and put out his hand, and his eyes were wet. "My name is Frank Coyle," he said. "Dana's my brother's wife. My blood near as makes no difference. Mr. Ward, I came up this road this morning thinking I was going to bury a man. I want you to know that. I want you to know exactly how close it came, because that's the only way you'll understand what I'm about to say." He gripped Elias' hand hard. "We were wrong. God as my witness, we were wrong, and you were kneeling in a storm saving her while we were riding up here to make you pay for it. There's no way to take that back. So I'm not going to try. I'm just going to say thank you, from every man on this road." Elias took his hand. His voice didn't quite come out steady this time. "I'd do it again," he said. "For anyone, you don't owe me anything." "See, that's the thing." Frank Coyle's mouth pulled into something almost a smile. "You keep saying that. That's exactly why you're getting it anyway." He let go of Elias' hand, turned to face his men, and raised his fist in the air. What happened next, Elias would carry with him for the rest of his life. 800 engines did not roar. That's what he expected. He expected the thunder to start back up. Instead, Frank Coyle brought his fist down slow, and one by one, front to back, those men climbed off their bikes. 800 of them. And they stood beside their machines in the gray morning on a dead-end gravel road in the Arizona desert, and they took off their sunglasses and they were quiet. And then they began to clap. It started at the front and rolled backward down the road like a wave, past the bend, out to the frontage road and beyond, until the whole desert was full of the sound of it. Hundreds of hard men, outlaws and veterans and fathers and grandfathers, standing in the dawn and applauding an old man on a porch who had never wanted a single soul to make a fuss over him. Elias stood there and let it wash over him. 15 years he'd spent trying to disappear, trying to be a mechanic, trying to be left alone, trying to keep the world at arm's length so it couldn't ask him for anything and couldn't thank him for anything either. And now the world had found him anyway, and it had come 800 strong, and it would not let him hide. Down at his side, Bishop had stopped growling. The old dog looked up and down the road at all those people, then looked up at Elias, and his tail gave one slow wag like he understood, like he knew he'd done a good thing too. Frank Coyle waited for the sound to die down. Then he said, "We don't come empty-handed. That's not how we do things. Dana's got a long road ahead. Surgeries, rehab, months of it. And she told us the man who saved her lives out here alone on a fixed pension, in a house he built with his own hands." He nodded down the road. "So here's what's going to happen, and I'll tell you now, arguing won't get you anywhere because we already voted and you weren't invited." A few of the men laughed. Some of the tightness in the morning broke. "There's men on this road who lay brick. Men who do roofing, plumbing, electrical, engines, well work. Anything you got that's broke on this property, it's getting fixed. Anything you need built, it's getting built. That fence, that roof, that truck that's older than my youngest. And every year on this date, some of us are going to ride out here and check on you, whether you like it or not. Because you're one of us now, Mr. Ward. Not a member, something better. Your family that chose us before you knew who we were, and that's the only kind of family that counts for anything." Elias didn't trust himself to speak for a moment. When he did, all he said was, "You people always do things this big." "No," Frank said, "but we don't get many chances to be this wrong and have it turn out this right. We're not going to waste it." They stayed the whole day. I mean that. Not all 800, of course, but scores did. By noon there were men on his roof and men under his truck and men digging out the drainage that had been flooding his garden for 3 years. Someone had a grill going. Someone else had driven into town and come back with enough food to feed an army, which, near enough, they were. Bishop went from man to man, getting scratched behind the ears, the happiest that old dog had been in years, and every so often somebody would kneel down and thank him too, quiet, just for the dog to hear. And in the middle of it all, Frank Coyle sat with Elias on the porch steps, two old men watching the work go on, and they talked. Frank told him about Dana, about how she'd ride out alone sometimes just to feel the road under her, and how the drunk in the pickup had clipped her and never even slowed down. The deputy, before he left, had taken all of it down, and by the end of the week they'd have a plate number and the whole weight of the county coming down on the man who did it. Justice was coming, but that was the county's business. This today was something else. "You know what she kept saying when she woke up?" Frank asked. "Before she could even tell us her own name straight, she said there was a dog. She said a man and a dog kept me warm. She thought she dreamed you. She thought God sent a man and a dog to lie down in the rain with her so she wouldn't be alone when she died." He shook his head. "And then she didn't die, and she made us promise, find them, find the man and the dog and tell them I made it." Elias looked out at the desert, at the men working on his land, at his old dog moving happy through the crowd. And something he'd been holding shut for 15 years came loose in his chest, just a little. Because here's the truth about Elias Ward, and it's the truth about a lot of men who have seen what he's seen. He didn't hide out here because he hated people. He hid because he'd spent his whole life saving them and losing them, and somewhere along the way he decided it was easier not to be part of anything at all. Easier to be the mechanic, easier to be left alone. If you don't belong to anyone, nobody can be taken from you. And now, in one strange morning, a broken woman he'd never see the same twice, and 800 men he'd never asked for had reached right through that fence he built and pulled him back into the world. Not because he was strong, not because of what he used to be. Because for 30 minutes on a dark highway, he'd chosen a stranger's life over his own comfort and asked for nothing. That's the thing nobody tells you. The bravest thing that man ever did wasn't done with a weapon. It was done on his knees in a storm with his bare hands for someone he'd never meet again. And it turned out that was the thing that finally brought him home. They finished the roof before dark. The truck ran better than it had in a decade. The garden had proper drainage for the first time since he'd owned the place. And as the sun went down red over the mesa, the men began to mount up, one by one, and the engines came back to life, that thunder rolling up out of the earth again. But it was a different sound now. Elias stood on his porch, and this time he didn't feel the cold go down his spine. He raised his hand, and 800 men raised theirs back and rode off into the dusk in a river of taillights, out to the frontage road and onto 66, back toward the woman who'd sent them. Dana Coyle walked again in time. Took the better part of a year and more steel in her leg than she liked, but she walked. And the first place she rode, once she could, was out to a dead-end gravel road 3 miles off Route 66, with her husband and Frank behind her, to sit on an old man's porch and meet the man and the dog she'd thought were a dream. She brought Elias nothing but her thanks and her whole heart, which was exactly the only thing he'd ever have accepted. She knelt down and put her arms around Bishop's gray neck and cried into his fur, and that old dog held still and let her, the way he'd held still in the rain. Elias Ward lived out his years on that land, and he was never really alone again, no matter how hard he'd once tried to be. Every year on the anniversary of that storm, the thunder would come rolling up his road, and he'd walk out onto his porch to meet it, and it never once frightened him, because he knew now what it meant. It meant he belonged to something. It meant that on one terrible night, he'd made a choice with his bare hands, and the world had chosen him right back. And when people in town asked him later why the Hell's Angels of all people would treat an old mechanic like blood, he'd just smile and say the same thing every time. I found somebody who needed help, he'd say. So I helped her. That's the whole story. But it wasn't the whole story. And every man who rode up that gravel road knew it wasn't. Because the whole story is that a man who thought his best days were behind him knelt in a storm and refused to let a stranger die. And that one choice, asked of no one and told to no one, came back to him 800 strong. Sometimes the quietest thing a man does in the dark is the loudest thing he'll ever be remembered for. Elias Ward never wanted to be remembered at all. That's exactly why he always will be.